Hey guys, Dimitri here, and welcome to my long-term review of my 2022 Husqvarna TE150i. So because I like to talk a lot and I have a lot of thoughts about this bike, I'm actually going to split this review up into some different parts. And this is part 0 of the review, which is answering I think the biggest question that everybody has, and the question that I most often get asked about this bike, which is a 150 too small for me? And then the later videos, part 1, part 2, part 3, we'll talk about the pros and cons of this bike, some of the things I like, some of the things I don't like, how it compares to the KTM and the gas. And maybe some other bikes. So let's dive right into the big question of whether a TE150 or a KTM 150 is too small for me. Kind of breaks down into a couple different aspects. One is the chassis and the other one is the power. So the chassis, let's just get that right out of the way right away. This is the exact same chassis as the 250 and as the 300. It's the same frame, the same suspension, the same plastics. Everything aside from the engine is the same. So I'm 5'11", 175 pounds. I found that this bike works really well for me out of the box. I run the suspension in the standard settings. Sometimes I'll change it to comfort if I'm riding a lot of rocks. But, dimensionally, this bike fits me really, really well, and I really like it. So the second part of the question of whether a 150 is too small is, of course, the engine, the 150cc, or I think it's 144cc engine. You can see how tiny that little jug is. It's pretty adorable. I will break that down into a couple different aspects. Hills, technical, and cornering, because I think they're a little bit different depending on what you're trying to do. In general, I will say that this bike feels a lot less like a 125 in its power delivery, and it feels more like a 200. So it actually has a good amount of low-end torque. So typically, when you're riding some single track, you're riding 3rd gear, maybe 4th gear on the 150. It's geared a little bit lower than the 300. And let's say you come to a 180 degree corner and you can hear it bog coming out of that corner. So, but at the same time, it still got out of the corner pretty quickly. I gave it a little bit of clutch and shot right out. Again, this is 3rd gear, 180 degree corner, pretty tight corner, and it has decent amount of low-end torque. So it's not as good as a, let's say, 350 4-stroke or a 300 2-stroke or 250 2-stroke, but it does get going. I'm not shifting. This is still 3rd gear. Obviously, if you want to get out of it the fastest possible, you would have to downshift to 2nd and then, really shoot out of it. All right, let's talk about climbs, or hill climbing. So this is a long hill. It's probably about 20 and 25 degrees, so it's fairly steep and loose. You can see a bunch of rocks. So right now I'm in 2nd gear, and you can hear the bike's got plenty of go. I just shifted up to 3rd, so I'm not really on the pipe. Bogging a little bit, but doing it. All right, so I'm sure the camera is not going to do it justice, but this here is the steepest hill on this property. It's probably between 30 and 35 degrees. And it's probably, I'd say, at least 100 yards or 100 meters long. It's loose, rocky dirt. In 1st gear, you have tons of power and you can go up the hill power-wise, but because you're on the pipe, the rear wheel is a little bit more likely to spin up. If you shift to second, you really need to keep your momentum, because that's where you're going to start bogging and really just not having enough power to pop the front wheel over obstacles if you need to give it a little bit more juice, so to speak, to when you're going up something really steep like this. So this kind of situation, I think, is where a 300 has a little bit of an advantage as far as being easy, because you can really just crawl up this in second gear and just kind of gradually make your way up. First gear, and you can hear how much the bike is revving, and it's spinning up. You hear the RPMs just exploding because the rear wheel is losing traction. But yeah, you can see how loose this hill is right here. So it's just loose and it's really steep. So I'm barely holding with my rear brake. Bike wants to slide backwards. So this is where it's really more about traction than power. And I'm just sitting on the very back of the bike. We're just slowly making our way up. First gear, just crawling. You can hear me trying to make it not spin up. Really working that clutch. Get up on the pegs. And we're up. And we get to enjoy this beautiful view, top of the mountain. All right, so the last aspect of whether a 150 has enough power is the technical riding, specifically being able to get your front wheel over stuff. So I think a lot of people think that if they don't have or that they have to have a 300 for doing hard enduro, mostly because if you're trying to get over logs or over rocks, you just don't have enough power to pop the front wheel up, which is 100% not true. So caveat, I'm not that good at wheelies, so I'm not gonna do, massive 100-yard 12 o'clock wheelie just because I don't know how to do that. Doesn't matter what the bike can do. But I can definitely very easily pop the front end up. That was very little effort, very low revs. Some quick pivot turns or something, there's tons of power there. If I need to pop my front wheel up over a log, plenty of power at basically any speed. So, if we're going trail speeds and I just need to pop a quick wheelie over something, definitely no problem. So if you're worried about not being able to get your front wheel over logs or over rocks on a 150, and that's why you're looking at a bike like a 300, that is not a good reason for that. This bike has plenty of power, and if anything, I think it's a little bit less scary, because if you're like me and you're not that great at wheelies, going a little bit too far with the throttle is not immediately going to break your rear fender or subframe or whatever bikes. And I will say that the main benefit of a 150 is that it is very confidence inspiring. This bike feels light and nimble and planted, and you're never really afraid of it. So if you give it a lot of throttle, you're not really going to get yourself into as much trouble as on a 300. You can be a little bit more liberal with it, and it just encourages you to play around. The downside, of course, is that it just does not have as much power as a 300 or a 250. There's no way of getting around that. It is a very fast bike when it gets on the pipe, don't get me wrong, but it is a small engine, so there's no replacement for displacement, and especially if you're tractoring up a bunch of steep hills or you want to ride around without shifting, of course this engine is not as good as in that situation as a 300 or a 250, which does make it a little bit more work to ride, especially if you're riding all day, or if you're racing enduros or hard enduro. You do have to shift more, you have to use the clutch more, you really have to be a lot more in control of the machine, which could also be viewed as a pro. If you want to learn to ride better, if you want to feel like you're riding the bike versus being a little bit more of a passenger on the bike, then I think a 150 is a great bike to try. You might be surprised how much it will teach you and how much it will sharpen your skills. All right, so this is pretty much it for me as far as a 150 and whether or not it has enough power for you. So hopefully my thoughts have kind of helped guide you if you're on the fence about getting a 150 KTM or Husky. And if you guys have any questions, definitely feel free to leave a comment. If you have any questions about my experience with the Husky in general, leave a comment and I'll try to answer some of the questions in the upcoming parts of my long-term review. And I hope you guys are getting some time on the bike this winter, and ride on.